So Leia and I go back a little bit. We met in the ocean space, and I personally was very inspired by what Blue Standard was doing because I don't know if many of you know, but I actually come from the corporate world. I used to work at Salesforce and DocuSign before I pivoted into climate work. And I see Blue Standard as a really important tool for corporates to start leaning in, understanding their impact on the ocean, whether you're professional services, whether you're a CPG. So I'm very excited to have Leia here share a little bit more about the work that she's doing. So Leia, tell us about Oceanic Global, which is sort of the parent organization, and how the Blue Standard came to be.
Well, first, thank you so much for having us and for always Blue verifying. It's was such an amazing partner, and Michelle is actually an advisor to the Blue Standard too. So Oceanic Global is a nonprofit that looks at reconnecting people back to the ocean and then looking at practical solutions to come back into balance. And so one of our programs, which is really the B2B program, is called the Blue Standard. And it really came out of a need of, we saw in 2017, 2018, a lot of governments around the world starting to make these really bold commitments around eliminating single-use plastics, but really not being able to actually engage specific industries like hospitality and tourism around this. So we developed Blue to meet businesses where they're at, to help them eliminate single-use plastics first across their supply chain, so looking at turning this off at the source, and then looking at additional Blue actions that you can take. So you just saw a presentation on composting, but it could go anything from responsible seafood to energy to water. And that's the really beautiful thing about the ocean. So many businesses are so disconnected. It's so focused on the green components. And so Blue really fits in this criteria of we are all impacting the ocean, whether we like it or not. And the reality is, as businesses, we have a responsibility to be shifting how we're currently operating across those supply chains.
Yeah, thank you, Leia. So what types of companies subscribe or receive verification from the Blue Standard? You've got some big brands in there.
Yeah, so it's been beautiful to see how Blue has grown so organically, actually. So we've worked with over 500 businesses now in 55 countries around the world. And that could be very small local businesses to much larger ones. So for example, this morning we actually held a roundtable around the Blue Standard and looking at how do we scale Blue solutions, but very much more focused on built spaces, real estate. So one of our partners, for example, is Brookfield Place, and we worked with them to verify their first food hall over the last few years, to working with much larger corporations like Anheuser-Busch and Corona, where we work with them to Blue verify all of their activations globally. So for example, including sponsored events like things like the Olympics, which is really exciting, but also linking that with community-based projects on the ground. So the really beautiful thing about Blue is there is a set criteria around it. We get all the really kind of practical impact metrics, but we are able to kind of push the boundary and design how these businesses are interacting also from a nature lens too. So for example, starting to do community-based grants through that, or looking at charity partnerships and cause marketing. Because the reality is these businesses are interfacing with customers constantly. So this is a really beautiful touch point to look at what does that look like to be in balance, as well as employees. So we also work with a lot of office spaces, and this is an opportunity for an office environment to start to embody a lot of this work and hopefully trickle into other ways and spheres of influence.
Well, I'm going to shout out Salesforce because I know their office in New York is Blue Standard verified. Can you maybe name like a couple of things that they did at their office to become Blue verified?
So Salesforce is actually one of the earliest office spaces that we worked with, and they are an amazing company because they're so embedded actually in the oceans at such a leadership level. And so we actually worked with it was actually through their employees. They came to us and they said, we would love to be able to bring this in. And that was really beautiful to kind of see more of like a bottom-up approach there. And that's something that we're seeing a lot actually with office spaces. So essentially what that looked like with them is auditing everything that they are currently doing. And then finding sustainable alternatives there. And so that may be working with our existing suppliers, or that may be finding new different types of solution providers. It may also be kind of switching to reusable systems there, and then doing some employee trainings around it too, lunch and learns, et cetera. So yeah.
Great. I'm sure everyone here has some kind of office, so if you want to learn more, talk to our Blue Standard team here. They'll be around. Um, this next question is really important. Many businesses find it challenging to connect the dots between their business and the ocean. Can you describe where those touch points may be and how can companies get started?
So the way that we talk about the ocean is the way that we talk about nature. Our message is essentially we live on a blue planet. So we very much talk about the fact that if you are in a landlocked area or not, you're still having an everyday impact on it, and a healthy ocean is needed for healthy livelihoods, healthy businesses. So that's kind of the larger narrative point there that I would say. And we're constantly looking at doing a lot of educational, actually, programming. The reality is that when we're going into a lot of these spaces, people will understand kind of how they connect. I'd say if they're in a coastal area, like within, the mangroves within the area, or if they have a thriving coral reef or something along those lines. But it's actually a lot tougher when you're working in places in cities like New York. And so when we're working in a place like New York, we very much highlight the fact that actually we're on an island. We're surrounded by coastline. We completely forget this. So we start to kind of weave in those larger narrative points too.
Yeah. And even something as simple as emissions, right? You probably have a building, you probably are using energy. If you're manufacturing, you're using more energy. And most of our energy still comes from fossil fuels, and that leads to greenhouse gas release, which has all kinds of crazy impacts on our ocean, from ocean acidity. Our oceans actually absorb some of the CO2, ocean warming, ocean stabilization. It's a bad thing. Our oceans are constantly in motion, and that's really important. But when they're warm, they're not mixing as much. So there's all these implications.
And the reality is the ocean has been our biggest ally in the climate crisis. It's absorbed over 90% of heat since the 1970s. And so when we're talking about oceans, we also try to make sure we're not making it political for obvious reasons within this current climate. And I think that's also a really beautiful entry point. And it was really interesting to hear Shaila speak earlier about businesses and the commitments that they're making, or how they're navigating that. And what was interesting this morning is a lot of the groups that we're working with are actually continuing to do the work, but they're not publicly talking about it. They're focusing on the energy component, and they're saying, we're going to wait 2 to 5 years, and hopefully at this point, people are ready to talk about biodiversity in this country at least, and all of these other markers, and we'll be able to say, this is what we've done.
So who here has heard of the BBNJ? Okay, a few people, nice. We're gonna expand that knowledge. So the BBNJ is something the ocean community is following closely. Can you provide a high-level overview of what it is and what is the current status?
So the BBNJ, I think, is probably one of the most exciting news that we've had in the ocean space. It was announced on Friday. I actually landed in New York and I opened my phone. It was the first thing that I saw, and I was like, yes, in the immigration line. So the BBNJ is the first, it's essentially the High Seas Treaty. So 2/3 of the planet is considered the high seas. And until this time, we had no legal protection for what that looked like. And so we needed 60 countries to ratify. And as of Friday, we have 60 countries that have ratified. And now we have 120 days for this to go into force. And this is a really big deal because it allows migration corridors to happen for the first time. Marine protected areas within the high seas. It creates a legal infrastructure to make things like deep sea mining much more challenging. So, in a world where we're just bombarded by terrible news, we've had 2 big wins for the ocean this week. We've had the BBNJ treaty, which people have been working on for 25 years. This is the biggest deal.
What does it stand for?
Beyond national jurisdictions. Yeah. And the second thing that I would love to mention, which you didn't ask, but I just feel like we need to know that things are moving, is also earlier last week, $22 billion was being subsidized to industrial fishing, and that has now been stopped through the WTO. So this is also a huge, huge win when you're looking at ocean health long term. So yeah, some big ocean wins on the horizon and currently here.
Well, we were in France for the UN Ocean Conference this year. It was my first one ever. And everyone was talking about the BBNJ, we need to ratify. What was it at then? What was the count? Was it like 30-something, 40-something?
So I think at the beginning it was in the 30s.
Yeah.
At the end of the conference, it was in the 50s actually. So whether we like it or not, there's a lot of opinions always around these types of convenings and if they're worth it. I would say just take the BB&J outcomes as a whole, and it really helped countries mobilize around specific goals. We saw that on the subsidies part, and now we've seen that on the BB&J.
Wonderful. Leah, thanks so much for stopping by. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Round of applause.
Thank you.